Blue Boy. Greenleaf is Walrus. This is Blue Boy. Negative items. All buildings have been searched. Negative items. Negative items. Understand negative items. Roger out. Stand by to withdraw normally. Blue Boy, Roger. When you the Apple come in this time, Roger, you need a flare, you got to leave Missouri. There's another flare just to make sure. Blue Boy, Walrus. How many people at your location? Walrus, this is Greenleaf, understand? Greenleaf, next aircraft. 2, 3, 2. Walrus, Greenleaf, stand by to next aircraft. Break, Blue Boy. How many people at your location, over? Each one, you reach 2. Go ahead, Bob. 4 is calling you. Hey, let's go to Sam. Go down. Stand loud, stand loud. 2 more Sams coming up.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay in the back? Very good. If you can't hear me, let me know. Throw a tomato or something. I'll be ready to dodge. First of all, I want to thank you for inviting me here tonight. It's an honor for me to come and share my story with other warriors that have done heroic missions all through their career. And I appreciate what you've done and look forward to hearing more stories. And so far, there have been some pretty good stories I've heard. But I'll move on here a little bit. The Sante raid, I don't know how many of you were aware of it. Thank you, I need that. It was all volunteer mission. We were told that it could be a 50-50 chance of not making it back. And we were told if we got captured, it'd be pretty much sudden death for most of us. And at that point, it put a little pucker factor in, but at the same time, the men went forward with it and did well on it. Reason for the mission. There was 114 POWs that died in captivity since the war had started there. There were 13 camps in North Vietnam at the time. 5 of those were in Hanoi, and the rest of them were scattered up and down from the China border on down. And along with that, there was like 591 POWs. So we needed to get in there and get them out. And at the same time, 50% of these have been held captive for over 5 years. And one gentleman was there for 9 years. So it was the right thing to do as a nation, and no man left behind is kind of the motto for the warriors of our era. So the planning of this started in April of 1970. A gentleman by the name of General Blackburn, who had been active with the Lausanne during World War II, and he was the one that was in charge of, went on to go for SOCOM. And the pictures that we had received, they received from the SR-71 and some of the drones proved that there was POWs there. Now, it's kind of interesting. I'm going to ad-lib a little part here. I found out that there was one of your gentlemen knew that the camp had been, POWs had been moved. And we know, based on what the POWs that were at Sante told us, they were moved to Camp Hope because the well went dry there at Sante. And even though the prisoners had been there, we'd have brought them home that night. But unfortunately, they had been moved. But our intel was good up to that point. And the reason they quit flying SR-71s and drones over it, they didn't want to tip off to the bad guys that we were looking at that camp. So there were several camps considered. Some of the biggest things they looked at is ease of access of getting in, but more importantly, ease of access of getting out of there. So Sante was out in the country. It was 23 miles northwest of Hanoi, and it was on the Sog River. So it fit itself well for what we wanted to do. They were looking at a small force. Our Army initially said 200. They planned to crash the C-130 and go into the compound and free the POWs. The SEALs said they could do it with 12, of course. And, and we know they're very tough. But we ended up with 56 of us, went in on the raid that night. The estimated time on ground, the thing that the planners didn't know, what was the guards told to do in case there was a chance of being rescued. They didn't know whether they were given the order to kill the POWs or run. So in the process of planning, they said we had to be in control of the guards inside the compound within 30 to 60 seconds. And what that meant was we were going to crash a chopper inside the compound. That's the only way we could get people in and out, take care of the guards in a timed fashion that would keep them protected. So that was one of the goals of the mission as well. At the time we were doing this, they said there was 20 to 80,000 NVA in the area. Keep in mind we were close to the capital of Hanoi, so there was a lot of people running around there that didn't like us. So for the selection process, when it started at Fort Bragg, Bull Simon is like the John Wayne of Special Forces. And everybody knew in Special Forces knew that Bull Simons, when he was on a mission, it was going to be a fun time. And he had a good reputation of getting you in and out safely. He was also active in World War II on the Bataan Death March, POWs that were put in Kobanatuan. So he had the experience needed, and everybody that knew Bull Simons knew he was going to be a good time. Bull Simons was looking for volunteers. We had about 1,500 show up at Fort Bragg that were interested in going. Now, when they said there was no TDY available, that number dropped. And Green Berets are the same way most guys are. TDY is a good deal. And but they dropped out. We started out then, they started doing the interview. He said, if you come back here at 1,300 hours, we'll start the interview process. Everyone that was selected was interviewed personally by a couple of command sergeant majors. And some of the questions they asked me, I was a greenhorn, had no combat experience. They had my 201 file, and the questions went like this, can you scuba dive? Well, at that time I wasn't scuba trained, but then they asked me if I had a combat experience, and of course they had my 201 file, and I knew couldn't lie to them. I said nope. And they said, well, can you weld? And I grew up on a farm, and we broke stuff all the time. And my neighbor, Sam, he always welded it for us. And I'd seen him weld enough that I thought, yeah, I can weld. So I told him, you bet I can weld. And fortunately, I didn't have to prove that to them. So they thanked me for my time, and I went back to my unit thinking, well, it was at least I got an interview in out of it, but nothing happened. We left Fort Bragg. There was 109 of us selected for the initial selection process. And I was on the advanced team. Now, in Special Forces, an E5, which I was, a buck sergeant, is the lowest rank, thank you, in Special Forces. So I was like a private. So I was brought in as the advanced team. We went down to Eglin Air Force Base, and the reason Eglin was chosen was because of all the different types of aircraft that fly around that place. And we didn't bring ourselves out to, somebody's going to say, what's going on in Field 3 there? We see a lot of H-53s flying around for some reason. But we went down there. The H-53s were what we used to fly in on. Before we went down there, we had to finish our will and get everything done. Now, I'd been on several training exercises, but I never had to do a will. So that was kind of a kick in the tail for me to think, wonder what this is, more than a little trip downtown. So got that. I wrote a letter to my parents thinking if anything did happen to me, I want them to know it was a volunteer process. And so went down with the advance team to Bragg, and the first things we did, we started fixing the site up for training. Now, we trained for 3 months on this, for this project. And what we did, we set up a mock compound. And the mock compound was made out of target cloth and 2x4s. And we built it to the specs that we were given of what the compound in Sante would look like. So that was how we did it. We set up the building where a lot of the training or a lot of the planning was done. We put 3 rolls of concertina wire around it, and it was guarded 24/7. And with our orders were to shoot to kill. So we also kind of got the idea that there's more to this than's going on we don't know about. And it was better for our own personal that nobody knew what was going on. And that was kept a good secret all the way along. The target cloth kind of looked like that. It was looked like toilet paper on a stick. And but there was reason for it. We knew that. And we trained it. The chains you see there, we had a acetylene torch that we used for practicing in case we had to cut chains off the POWs or cut doors down that may have had locks on them. So those were some of the items we had. The first month was basically reinforcement of our military occupation skills. Mine was demolitions and stuff, so we did a lot of little things like that, plus the physical training of making sure everybody was in good shape. They divided us up into 3 elements. Red wine, green leaf, and blue boy were our call signs. I happened to be on red wine, and blue boy was the chopper that landed inside the compound. It was a controlled crash landing, if you will. We walked in, changed on a monthly basis, we did, or on a daily basis, we were doing walkthroughs. And on the walkthroughs, they changed all the time, trying to improve our accuracy and also improve the way we entered into the compounds. We did searching buildings, so that was kind of a new twist for us. And the psychologist that was working with us said one of the things they want, one of the POWs or some of them may have been fraternizing with the enemy. The other POWs may want to take that person out. So we actually, of the 109, there was only 56 of us actually doing the training. So the others were supporting the guys that were doing the training, and we'd go out to a building that was vacant, hide people in it, and then we had to go find them, and then they would think that it was a bad, it was a trick, and so they would run or something, and we learned how to handle that situation, or if a person was attacking another one, how to combat that. So it was kind of some real life situations that may have taken place inside the compounds. The second month, what we did, we added choppers to it. And we were going in and we were doing a deuce and a half would take us in and we'd walk through it. And when in the second month, we started adding the choppers, and the choppers would come in, land us, and I got to tell you, we had the best pilots that the Air Force had at that time. I mean, these guys they did a fabulous job. And most of our training, 80% of our training was done at night. And the C-130s would drop a flare up over the compound, and then we would come in and do the walkthroughs. We went from walkthroughs to once the choppers were added, and then we fit in the problem that I ran into on the chopper was I'd seen enough cowboy shows and westerns that the first guy off the chopper gets plugged. Well, I was the first guy off in the initial thing, and I'm thinking, I don't think I'm going to like this. I'm not even going to get a foot on foreign soil and I'll be dead. And then they changed it. I was the last guy off, and I'm thinking, now the guy's going to get sighted in, and I'm going to get plugged. So this is a losing battle. So I said, there's only one thing I can do, and that's turn it over to the good Lord. And I figure if he wants me, he knows where I live, and he'll come and get me. So, and that's how I justified it in my mind. And it worked out. I made it back and didn't get too many bad ones. The flares were great because we learned how to, we were using some pretty elaborate night vision. They were World War II ski goggles. You had amber or you had clear. And I chose the amber because it was cooler looking than the clear was. But it was basically to keep the sand out of our eyes as the choppers kicked up the dust for us. So, like I said, 80% of our training was at night, and accuracy on sight, we were shooting some pretty poor times. Our accuracy was about 50%, and Bull Simons was not happy with that, and shouldn't have been. So they got to looking through some sport magazines, and they found the Armalite scope. Now, this scope was jerry-rigged to fit an AR-15, and it worked out perfect. Our accuracy went from 50% to about 95%, and it was used for quick kill. So wherever you saw your target, you put the dot on it, pull the trigger, that's where your bullet hit. And it was great. It was a very good addition to our team. The compound, the CIA made a compound for us, and it was a mock-up. The name is Barbara, named after the secretary of that department. And so the way we used that is we had a little prism, and when we weren't training, you were in the building looking through that prism, and it put you down on the ground like you were standing there with the same height. So you immediately got acclimated when you looked through that prism as to where you were in relationship to where the chopper let you off and where you were headed to do your duty. So it was a real help to each one. And every chopper was then every red wine, green leaf, and blue boy. They also were all divided into different 2 or 3 man groups, and they had specific missions within the mission. So we worked, there's the pretty the third month we went into alternates. The alternate plans were designed if, let's say, red wine went down, then we would go to alternate red wine. The planners said we could go continue the mission if we lost 1 chopper. If we lost 2 choppers, we would abort the mission. And the reason because 1 chopper wouldn't have enough manpower. Remember how many were in the area, and people were in the area. So that was the details. We fine-tuned in the 3rd month that we were there. We were still going back to our original process. We did over 170 rehearsals. Now that seems like a lot of rehearsals, but I can tell you, it's like sport. The more you train, the better and more proficient you become, and that's what we did. We became very proficient. Each man knew what his goal was, and if you were in that track, that's your fault. So, and we had a couple of issues where we were throwing grenades. That was the other thing. We trained with live ammo, which was a little unusual in the military at that time for weapons of ARs. But it worked out better for us to do that, and no one really got hurt. We did an E&E, escape and evasion. We later discovered after where we found out where we were going, that an E&E was impossible for us. We were a long way from friendly folks, and if there was a breach in security, we had a mission that was to back up to the Saug River and make it as bloody for them as possible. We had an R&R, relaxation and doing nothing. Friday night fights, that actually was on our training schedule. You take 109 guys, we had a little bar, and Friday night was the night that we relaxed. And those relaxations turned into fights among ourselves. And one night we had I had gone to bed, it was about 1:30 in the morning, and we were in the old barracks where it was just a big open bay, and you had a bunk. And I heard a commission going on, and I looked down, and there was a couple of our guys were holding this master sergeant down, and he had come back, he had gotten in an argument with the bull, and he come back to get his gun to shoot the bull. And I mean, literally shoot the bull. And these guys convinced him that that wasn't going to happen. Well, the next morning, Bull Simons had this E8 out on the parade field with his heels locked at attention. And I'm sure they weren't talking about the price of lettuce, but he chewed his butt up one side and down the other. But Bull's the type of guy that he said he didn't want Boy Scouts. And he had the conversation with the master sergeant, and the master sergeant went on the mission with us, and there was never anything said else about it. But it was an education in drinking, or not drinking. So we had a beach party one night, or one day. They took us out to a beach, and there was nobody there but us. And we had beer and steaks. And then they brought in a band one night with some pretty ladies. Now, there were a few of us that were single, and we later found out that these were not normal ladies. They actually worked for the CIA. And they were checking the young bucks if they had loose lips. And fortunately, none of us revealed what we were doing. And we were asked by these ladies, by several of them, what we were doing, how we did this, why are you at Auxiliary Field 3? Well, we just told them, we're out here playing and that's it. But it was interesting to me later on to find out that how the military checks you out sometimes, and you think you're just normal, but wasn't. November the 16th, they told us to pack our bags. We're leaving. Well, we didn't have a chaplain, but we did have Pappy Kittleson. Now, Pappy Kittleson made history the night that we flew into Sante. He's the only American that has ever been on 4 POW raids. At the age of 19, he was the youngest person on the Cabanatuan raid that saved 511 Americans from the that had been on the death march. Plus Pappy was the oldest non-com. He was 46 years old when we went on the raid. And he was a great Christian, and he said he was going to have a prayer meeting if anybody wanted to join. Well, I walked into the Billings that day, and I could not believe these guys that were wrestling and fighting and doing everything they shouldn't have done were on their knees praying, and the good Lord was with us on the mission. I'm a firm believer of that. And Pappy was the guy doing it. We didn't know where we were going. We just told to pack our bags, and we took off, and the song Leaving on a Jet Plane, Don't Know When I'll Be Back Again became our theme song. And so we took off. We ended up in Norton Air Force Base, and then we flew on into Alaska, on into Japan, and ended up in somewhere where you guys are familiar with, at Takli. And we didn't know exactly where we are, and they picked us up in little bread trucks, took us to the compound, which they told us was the CIA compound, and told us to get comfortable. And so for the next 3 or 4 days, we sat around trying to get comfortable and wonder, when are we going to do anything? And as the Royal Thai Army was kind of our guard and kept us under control and did a good job. At Takli, we did a little all of our weapons were put into one area, a hangar, and we were then told rumor control was just going crazy. At that time, there happened to be a lot of planes on tarmacs around the world, and we thought we were going in maybe to do a rescue of some of those, but we didn't really know what we were doing. We were just still in limbo. Troops were getting very restless. We had a LTC, Lieutenant Colonel, was our doctor, Dr. Cataldo. Now, this guy had never been in combat either, but he did volunteer to go on the raid, so my hat was off to him. Unfortunately, one day we were practicing and his weapon went off in the floor of the chopper, and that was a no-no. We knew that. A couple of nights later, he shot a hole in the top of the chopper. So with that in mind, we talked to the bull, and I told the bull that, can you take his weapon away or just give him an empty one? And so we decided that's what we'd do, and we did. And we didn't get wounded by him anyway. So he gave us a sleeping pill that day for lunch, and we were supposed to take it and go back to our billet and get some rest. I don't think anybody took the pill, but we stood around and waited. So we were then told, for dinner we were served a steak. Another little clue that maybe something might be a little different there. And we hadn't had steak since a long time, you know. So we had our steaks, and then we were told to show up in the auditorium at 1800 hours. Now, what happened, we went to the auditorium. We had been there for a movie the night before, and Bull walks in, him and Colonel Sidnor. And Colonel Sidnor happens to be in charge of the Rangers at that time, and he was the battalion commander with the Ranger facility at Benning. And so we went in, and they came in, and Bull told us where we were going and what we were going to do. And can you read that in the back? Okay. Bull told us that that's where we were going, and it was pulled down a big map of North Vietnam, had a big circle around Hanoi and a bigger one around Sante. He said, gentlemen, that's where we're going tonight, and we're going to rescue anywhere from 60 to 70 POWs. You could have heard a pin drop. It got dead quiet, and then it was like a cannon went off. Guys jumped up, patting each other on the back, hollering, let's go get them, we're going, let's get them. And the enthusiasm was great. And Bull calmed us down, you know, after we jumped around a little bit. And that's when he told us the other news. He said, gentlemen, this is strictly a volunteer mission. There's a 50-50 chance some of us won't come back. And if you want to jump out now, now's the time to do it. Well, I'm happy to tell you that none of the men said no to the option of going on the mission. So we were told to get our weapons, go back to draw our ammo and everything. In the meantime, this is a letter that President Nixon, we were waiting all this time, we found out later, for President Nixon to give us the okay. And he gave the okay. And he also took the responsibility of that if something went south on this mission, that he would take full responsibility for it. And he thought the risk was worth it. I kind of think back, well, what risk was he running? But you know, that's higher over my pay grade. But anyway, he supported us, which was good. Game on. So we go back, we get our weapons, we check our weapons, we get ammo, and checking our radios. I was an RTO on our element. And let's see, what else did we, grenades, we picked everything we had and we were ready to go. So we were told, all the old timers kept coming up to me because I was the kid of the group. I was 20 years old and never been in combat. And they kept telling me, you know, don't hesitate. And I understood what they were saying, but I didn't understand it till it happened. And I learned real quickly what hesitate will get you killed. So anyway, that's what happened there. We loaded our C-130s and we flew up to Eudorn. And when we got to Eudorn, now some of the things we did, some of the first things I guess, was the refueling. Now refueling in the daytime, I think the other day when I was asking that gentleman over at the Air Force, I was kind of curious as how hard that is to do. Especially, we went in no lights and no communications between any of the choppers or the C-130. And we were flying over treetop level. And I mean, it looked like you could reach out and touch the trees and stuff. And we were flying at 105 knots, which is 5 knots above stall speed for the C-130. And we did that so the HH-3 could keep up with it. And it was flying in the draft of the C-130. And we flew that all the way into Sante. We looked like a flock of geese flying, is what it really looked like. And fortunately, the moon was in our favor. A quarter moon is what we were looking for, and that's what we had. And so we had flown this so many times that it was just kind of second nature to us. So that's another picture of it. It was about a 3.5 hour flight into Sante. Now, having never been in combat, my best buddy I grew up with was getting married that night, and I was supposed to be his best man. And I was half a world away from him. I'll never forget his wedding date, though. So we had plenty of time to think, and as I looked around, the guys, you know, these guys, some guys were just sitting around laughing, telling jokes to one another and grinning, and other guys were sleeping. But the idea of that 50-50 not making it back kept going through my mind. And as a 20-year-old, and I thought, well, you know, this may be my last mission or my first mission, and so whatever God wants, that's what it's going to be. And that's where I went through it. The area we were going into was very well protected. And we didn't find this information out till after we got back and we were talking to some of the people. We knew it was going to be a lot of opportunity to see things that we had never seen. And there was a SAM site, right down about 8 miles from us. And then there was anti-aircraft. So we had a lot of opportunity to get shot out of the air, but we didn't. So that was a good part of it. They told the pilots if they would stay at 3,000 feet, they'd be pretty safe. Now, I don't know. Joe, you tell me. Is that safe? No, I didn't think it was either. But again, knowing how many NVA were in the area, it was kind of a scary thought at the time. And they fired about 20 SAMs at us that night. Now, what was interesting about this was the diversion. And the Navy and Air Force did a great job here. The Sante raid, the importance of it, the Sante raid, was freeing the POWs. But one of the things that came out of this was the largest airline or aircraft of the Vietnam War. Over 116 aircraft took place, and they were dropping flares over Hanoi. And not one MiG got off the ground. And they were, the chatter that they were hearing, they were so confused they didn't know what to do. So they didn't do anything, which was to our advantage. But there was a lot of things, and this is where NKP comes into play. I think you guys did a great job of making sure that those craft got where they needed to be when we needed them as well. So thank you from the Sante Raiders, appreciate it. The MiGs, they had their chance. The element of surprise is what we had going for us. And that was the whole thing. And Blue Boy lands inside the compound. Now, and the idea was to get immediate access. One of our guys had a cousin that was a POW. And he said if we ever go to North Vietnam to rescue him, he wants to be the first guy on the ground. Well, Blue Boy, as it was coming in to the compound, the trees, the intel we had was a little off in one respect because the trees were a little taller than we expected. And the chopper blade, when it was rotary, hit the top of the tree, and the young man was out on the deck of the chopper, and when it cocked him out, threw his tail out of the bird, and he was the first man on the ground and got his wish. But and they took care of the compound there were 3 towers at Sante, and one of our choppers, H-53s, went ahead of us and cleared 2 of them out, but we still had one. We couldn't get to it and shoot through it because we would be shooting into where the POWs would have been held. So that one had to be taken quickly as possible, and that's what, when they crashed it inside the compound, that's what they did. Not knowing whether the guards would run or kill our POWs was the biggest issue we fought at that time. The message come on. I was an RTO. I had a headset on one side and an open on the other. And the message come across on mine just as we were getting ready to touch down, alternate plan green. And I did say again, and it was alternate plan green, over. And what that told me was Greenleaf had either engine trouble or Greenleaf had been shot down. Regardless, we were 22 men short because that's how many were on there. And Bull Simons was on that bird. So we became red wine, and I told my captain, Dan Turner, that alternate plan green. And he looked at me like, oh crap, you gotta be kidding. And he said, well, pass it on. So I passed it on. And this is where the training really paid off for us. Because even though we had trained the 170 times, we knew exactly how to respond to an alternate plan as well. And we did. And we went in, and about that time, the pucker factor for me was pretty high at that point. And the next thing that really got it up was the minigun sitting to my right started firing. Now, those of you that heard a minigun take off, that's 4,000 rounds a minute. And it throws some lead out real quick. And that got the pucker factor up even higher. I didn't think it'd get any higher that night, but it did. And so we exited the aircraft, and we became the assault for that Greenleaf was supposed to do with 22 men. We were now down to doing it with 12 guys. So what helped us, though, was the minigun opening up, and the garden building was on fire when we got out of that. And just as we were exiting the aircraft, my captain and I were the last 2 off. He was receiving fire from a guy inside the compound that we hadn't got into yet, and Blue Boy hadn't been able to take him out either. And that's where I had my first event, where there's no hesitation to take him out, and we did. We had 3 buildings to clear, Captain Turner and myself. We needed to get to the commo shed as quickly as we can. That was the alternate plan, because the commo, we wanted to get there so they wouldn't be calling in reinforcements. So we had 2 buildings or 3 buildings to clear before we got there. Now, we cleared buildings a little different than they do today on the SWAT teams that you see. We would throw a concussion grenade in, and that concussion grenade really, as you know, is pretty powerful in blowing your ears out. And we would follow that in, and Captain Turner would hit the floor, and we would start a crisscross. He would start in one corner, I'd start in the other, and then I'd back out and we'd shine the flashlight. Our orders were to take no prisoners. We were there to get our POWs, but we weren't to take any prisoners home with us from up the NBA. And we got to, finally got to the commo building, and that's when the second bad news came. I heard on my headset, negative items. Now, items was code word for POWs. So when we heard negative items, it was like, oh no, it can't be, this can't be. Well, in the meantime, Greenleaf had not crashed and had not been shot down, but it drifted. And remember, we went in without communication, without lights, and he drifted over and let the guys out. And they got out just like we did. Shooting with anything in front of them was a bad guy. And they ruined the graduating class over there at the secondary school that night. But the good thing that I still believe to this day, they probably saved our bacon, because we weren't aware of, we were aware it was a secondary school, but we didn't know what we found out that night, that they were either Chinese or Russians. And they were there training the NVA on the SAMs and missiles and stuff. So the Greenleaf took out about 100 of them. And they could have been, they were only about 500 meters from us. So they could have came up and been bringing havoc on us had we not done what Greenleaf did. So it was kind of, some people say it's a mission in a mission, but it really wasn't. It was just a fluke, and it worked out to our advantage. And there's where the good Lord, I think, was on our side. And when they came back, the pilot saw what he had done, came back, picked him up, dropped him off just like they would of us. Now they got off shooting at anything in front of them, and it was a little, there for, seemed like a little couple, 5-10 minutes, but it was actually only about a minute or so. But we got control, and they came up with us, and we were then working together as a team. But Bull Simons, when found out that there was no items, we had blown a hole in the wall to bring the POWs out with a det cord. And when the hole was blown, Bull went in and checked. Dick Meadows was on a bullhorn talking, saying, "We're Americans, we're here to free you, stay in your cell, stay down." So, but we went through, or I say we, the guys on the inside of the compound, went through every cell, making sure that nobody was there. And then Bull Simons came in and did the same thing. He wanted to make sure that we did not leave anybody there by accident. So we then were told to regroup. They called back in the choppers. When the choppers let us off, they took off and they landed in a field about 4 or 5 miles from us. So, and left their engines running. So when we called them back in, they could get in quickly, and we reloaded. We got in, and things were going pretty smooth, so we started doing a head count. We did a head count where we were 1 man short. So, no man left behind. So we did another head count, still 1 man short. So we did a third head count. Dick Turner counted himself that time. So, yeah, you laugh. Yeah, it was, he made a little mistake, but we got it rectified. And our chopper took off, and we lifted up, and they turned, and Dick, or Dan and I were sitting on the tail end with a PJ in between us. And we were looking out over the lights of Hanoi like you were looking out. I mean, couldn't believe how bright Hanoi was, and we all lit up. And we'd been in the air maybe 2 or 3 minutes, it seemed like. And we're kicked back now. We're going home, and we didn't get any POWs, but we didn't lose anybody. We had 1 man got shot, and which was not too bad in the situation. And then all of a sudden, man, our chopper just dropped to the right, and we thought, holy crud, we're crashing. And looked out the tail, and there was this big orange pole going up our tail. And I'd never seen a SAM missile before, and I didn't want to see any more after that one. But I asked Dan. I said, I hollered over him, what was that? And the PJ said, it's a SAM. And it was like, oh my God, Army guys, we like to be able to hide if we need to be, but you don't hide up there like that. And my hat went off to the pilots. I mean, they just did a fantastic job of doing that, getting us in and getting us out. We had one guy, one of the F-104s got hit by a SAM missile, and Tom spent the night in North Vietnam on a hillside. PJs picked him up the next morning, so we didn't lose anybody. We lost an F-104 is all we lost, but no men were lost. It was very disappointing. We trained for 3 months and we got back, and it was a sad night for us, and very, very frustrating. Our intel, we should have listened to someone. That's what it boiled down to, Stephen. Yeah, but we got back and went back to our billets, and the way the Special Forces works, that was a mission, and we were headed back to our units, and we were on a training exercise. It was our cover, and then Hanoi came out and said they were being bombed. Well, they were flares that were being dropped. So what happened, because of all the publicity they were getting out of it, they turned it in, and that's when they announced that we had had a raid on a POW camp in the North Vietnam, and they turned it into more of a news article than anything else. Otherwise, the only people that had known about the Sante raid was a few people. So that's my story.
Oh.
And
Anybody have a question?
yes.
Raise your hand if you got a question, stand up. Speak loudly.
Yes, sir. Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
I'd like to know, this operation was called Operation Ivory Coast?
Yes.
Okay. And one thing I understand that did happen after the raid, the POWs were treated better.
Yes.
Is that true?
There's one right there. Ask him.
Right.
That is. Right. Go ahead.
Yeah, if I may just take 4 minutes. A lot of people at the time considered that raid to be a failure. Nothing could be further from the truth.
Right.
From the POW's point of view, it was a huge success, even though we didn't get arrested. Terry mentioned Camp Faith, where the prisoners who had been at Sante were taken to.
Right.
About a month before the raid.
Mm-hmm.
I was in Camp Faith, and I don't, it's been so long, I don't remember how far that was from Sante, but I think.
About five clicks.
Yeah, about that, yeah,
Yeah.
5 to 7 clicks, yeah. I had a ringside seat. I saw the entire fireworks. I had no idea what was going on, but it was a hell of a show. I mean, remember, this was flat rice paddy area.
Mm-hmm.
So even at that distance, I had a clear view of all the fireworks. And I'm not going to get into telling you how we, the POWs, found out the truth about exactly what happened. I'll be happy to talk about that to anybody. What I remember is the next morning when we got let out of our cells, hanging from every tree limb in our compound were paper cutouts of helicopters. It scared the bejesus out of them. I mean, you can't look.
Yeah.
The looks on their face, we didn't know what was happening, but these people were scared. And those paper cutouts were up there as the initial training for anybody with a rifle. You see something that looks like this.
Sure. Yep.
They evacuated Camp Faith and all the rest of the outlying prison camps and took us all back to the Hanoi Hilton in the center of Hanoi. And there were so many of us. That prison was built to hold baby prisoners. There were so many of us that they had to put us in about a half a dozen very large cells that would hold between 40 and 50 prisoners.
Right.
You got to remember, this is, when was it, 71?
70.
I'm sorry, 70. So most of us at that point in time had been there for 3 to 5 years and had been living anywhere from 1 to 4 persons per cell, serious isolation from anybody
Right.
else. And that comes with a lot of challenge. But they were forced to put us in these large cells, couldn't keep us isolated anymore. And it's not that the treatment improved per se, but the fact that we were in large groups made life so much better for us. And so here you had now hundreds of prisoners in very close proximity in the same place. And by that time, our prison grapevines were so sophisticated that we had direct communication with each other in a complete military structure with chains of command and everything. And psychologically, there is nothing that occurred that lifted our spirits any more than the song Ivory. I'm not sure we would have come back with our sanity. I'm not sure we did anyway.
These are just some pictures. That's me with hair on the ground. Anybody pick me out? I'm not the black guy.
Top left?
Yep, no hair. This is our red wine guys, bunch of ragbag guys, but they did a great job.
Terry, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
When Tom, my late husband, who was a POW, and I watched the Bin Laden raid, the first thing that he said was, "Oh my God, they have absolutely taken the footprint
Yes.
of the Sante raid and put it into effect." Is that true?
Yes, the Sante raid is taught at every, John, you might have had it at West Point. Did they teach Sante there?
I was a little ahead of that time, so I didn't have a chance.
Oh, okay. I thought you was only 21. But Sante is taught at all of the West Point as well as the Academy, Air Force Academy, things like that. It's become the standard for POW raids. Bin Laden was a good example of that, how they went in. The only thing that they had that we didn't have was great night vision, you know, and a Belgian Mal to go in and fight for them as well. But I have a couple of Belgian. This is Pappy Kittleson. I had Pappy Kittleson by half an inch. He was the shortest guy. I was the second shortest. He's from Iowa. Great guy. There's some of your Air Force buddies. The tap code was used for communications, and there's a great book out. Schmitty wrote a book on tap code. And this was just one of the places they were put in if they misbehaved or needed in there. These are pictures that were taken a few years later in 1998. There's a bunch of POWs. The gentleman on the far right there, Doug Clark, he just wrote a book as well on the POWs. If you go to the Air Force, you'll find this mock-up at the museum. This gentleman here, Doug Ford, or David Ford, was had some breathing problems he liked to smoke and problems, but he's real happy there. We was at a Ross Perot reunion, and if you wondered what made him happy was only Ross Perot could bring in yeah. So I have a book out. Some of you have it, and there you go. I also have some 50th anniversary posters back there, and I think I have enough poster for each individual. Ladies, I'm not trying to discredit you or anything, but the men would probably appreciate those, so please feel free to take one. And these are just books by Ralph Gaither, wrote one, Got in a POW Camp. Some of the books that are out there. So.
Any other questions? Going once?
Yes, sir, two.
Okay.
Number one, I would like to hear, and I've seen pictures in your book of Colonel Bull Simons, who did look like a bulldog. If you could describe him in a little more detail, what a heck of a guy he was. And the second is, there's a movie coming out, or trying to come out.
Mm-hmm.
And could you tell us a little about that, about the Santé?
Right. The movie is 27 minutes, is the title of it. And they've been working on it for about 3 years. And when they came to the Santé Raid Association and asked if they could use some of they wanted to interview a bunch of the POWs as well as raiders. And one of the things the association said that whatever you make this movie about, it's got to be authentic. It can't be a Hollywood movie. And I've seen the movie that's about finished, and they're working with Warner Brothers right now to get it labeled, or either with Amazon One. They're not sure. They're trying to get it done. But they did a really good job of the accuracy of it, and listening to on the 50th anniversary of the Santé Raid, myself and 2 other raiders took us out to Arizona, and they made a mock-up of the compound and everything. And they wanted to know how we cleared buildings, or how we did this, or how we did that, and we showed them. And we told them, this is the way it was. This is not Hollywood. This is what we did to solve the problems. And they listened to us. And in the movie, they really did a nice job, I think, of listening to and making it authentic. And then, of course, the interviews were all good, from POWs to raiders to people that were support. So they did a great cross-section, and it should be released probably within the next 6 months. So hopefully it'll be a good one. And Bull Simons was just a remarkable individual. The first time I was doing a lot of guard duty, and we rotated on guard duty, and being a buck sergeant, I got to do a lot of guard duty. But if I wasn't on guard duty, I was training or sleeping. And before you could go into the TOC building where they were doing the planning, they had a field phone set up. You'd call in, and somebody from the inside would have to come out and escort the person in. Well, Bull came in one day, and I was called in and waiting for somebody to come out and escort him, and he asked me how things were going. And I said, well, if he asked, I'm going to tell him. And I said, sir, I didn't come down here to pull guard duty. I came down here to be a part of a mission. And he didn't smoke a cigar, he just chewed on it. And he pulled it out, and he looked at me, and he says, young man, he says, you just hang in there. We're going to make some changes in a few weeks. And he put the cigar back in and walked in. I thought, oh man, I'm going to pull guard duty till I die now. But 2 weeks later, they I made the first cut, and I didn't have to pull any more guard duty. So I was pretty happy about that. But Bull was just a remarkable individual. Had a great aura about him, and he didn't have his sense of humor was pretty dry. But he'd chuckle every once in a while, but he was pretty much all business, and that's the way it worked. So Folks, I appreciate your attendance, and I hope you learned something from this. And I agree with what you're saying about grandchildren. We have grandchildren, and they need to know about this, and they need to know about a lot of things that are not being taught in the schools today. So anyway, thank you very much. Appreciate it, and God bless you. So, thanks.
Take one.